Hey, welcome to Leadership for Society. I'm Brian Lowry, professor at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and the theme this year is the intersection of public and private leadership. And I'm really excited today to have Secretary Chow, former Secretary of Transportation and Secretary of Labor. Welcome so much, Secretary Chow.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, before we get going, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the things you've done because I mentioned maybe the two most prominent roles you've had, but you've had quite a career. So you started in the private sector, and I'd love to hear a little bit about that and some of the other things you've done too in kind of the more public sector.
Well, I'm an immigrant to this country. So I came to America when I was 8 years old, and we didn't understand so much about America, and I didn't know what kinds of opportunities would be available. So when I was growing up, the only opportunity that you would have, and that was a good one, was just to start in business. But then as I became, more assimilated and more acclimated to this society, I realized that people can make their living in all different kinds of ways, and that the options are much more varied than what we initially thought. And I come from a very, very strong, loving family. My father, and I always say this, I can't talk about myself without talking about my family, because without them, I wouldn't be where I am today. So my father and mother are Americans of Chinese descent. My father was born in Shanghai in a small farming village of 8 families. My mother came from a very wealthy family, very prominent family, and she had several siblings. And her family was unique in that they believed in the education of women. Now, for two young people of such disparate backgrounds, and she came from Anhui province, the society was falling apart, which was how these two young people of such different socioeconomic backgrounds were able to meet. And then they made their separate ways to Taiwan when the mainland when the mainland changed, governments. And my father became one of the youngest sea captains at the age of 29. And because he had achieved so much, he wanted to try something different because life at sea was difficult. He was away 8 to 10 months out of the year. It was difficult for the family. And so he and my mother made the momentous decision that they were going to try to go to America. My father went first. He took a national examination because martial law at that time still existed in Taiwan. And so he took a national examination and scored #1 and broke all the records. And he was allowed to leave, and he came to America. And it took him about 3 years before he was able to bring us to America. And my mother was 7 months pregnant when he left. So it was, just an incredible story. And I think what it shows is that America is still the land of opportunity for so many people. And for young people, young kids, despite the challenges and the difficulties of the time, we were financially not very facile, should I say. We were really, really under very modest circumstances. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. My father had 3 jobs. He earned $300 a month. And from that, my mother was able to save $50. And, we scrimped and saved on everything. And to this day, I'm still very frugal. But I never thought of ourselves as being poor because we had hope. We had each other. And I think those are life's 2 most precious gifts.
And so then I'd love to hear a little bit about, that's an incredible story, of how you
Yeah.
came here and how you got to be where you are in your family. I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience in private sector. So you went to Harvard Business School eventually and then worked in
Oh my gosh, by the time I went to Harvard Business School, I was like so far removed already from my roots. I grew up, as mentioned, in a small 1-bedroom apartment. I went to PS 117 in Jamaica, New York. And then for high school, I went to JHS, Junior High School 217. And then if you went to high school, it was like HS 317. It was really, really creative. But we moved halfway through my 8th grade year to move to Syosset as my family's economic situation
Mm,
got better. But we never thought that tomorrow would not bring a better day. So my
mm,
parents were optimistic, really motivated, determined, very loving,
mhm,
and they imbued within their daughters, a sense of possibilities.
mhm,
And they were so brave because they didn't know what America would offer their daughters. And
mhm,
they came here only with the confidence that America would indeed offer their daughters better opportunities.
mhm. And you've done well in taking advantage of those opportunities, I would say, in that I assume you've made your parents proud or you made your parents proud.
I didn't think, looking back, I didn't take advantage of them so much as
Mm,
I was just trying to survive.
mm,
But my parents also gave me a very good life lesson. And that is, they didn't lecture. I mean, they didn't say a lot of these things by
mhm,
their actions, by the way they conducted their lives. We knew that we had to work hard and
mhm,
that working hard was necessary. So whatever I did, I tried the best I could.
mhm,
And, you know, I, I tried to do the best I could.
mhm.
So a lot of people think I'm ambitious, and in Asian culture, ambition is not a good word. In
Oh,
Chinese, ambition is translated into wild heart, which is like not good.
so you have a
So
wild card.
yeah, I don't think I was ambitious. I just wanted to do well, to make my parents proud, and to take care of my sisters.
Hmm.
And armed with curiosity, I was able to explore new new environments,
Hmm.
um, new options. My father always encouraged us to expand our horizons and
Hmm.
don't stay within our little community of immigrants,
Hmm.
but look outside. The world is so big outside.
Hmm.
Look and learn.
Hmm.
And we didn't have anybody to teach us either. I mean, we didn't speak English. My father taught me English,
Hmm.
and he speaks English even today with a very heavy accent. So
Hmm.
it's actually kind of frightening that he taught me English. He had three jobs. At night, he would come back.
Hmm.
We would go through the day's lessons that I would copied, that I would have copied from the blackboard. And I think those, years of where I'm trying to learn English and he was trying to teach me formed a very strong bond between father and daughter.
Hmm.
And those kinds of emotional bonds are very powerful in resiliency, in buoyancy, coming back,
Hmm.
and in looking ahead.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you said that one of the things you wanted to do was take care of your family, and you seem,
Yeah.
I mean, you as a firstborn, I'm sure that there was a lot of expectations, and I'm sure a lot of um, gratitude for what you were doing. And you've honestly done a lot more. So you took on public roles, large public roles, where you were supporting the wider
Yeah,
community.
I think that again, I mean, it wasn't as if I purposefully looked at these steps and
Mm,
then charted a path forward. I was just curious and I was so confused. I mean, I couldn't understand so many things. And so I said to myself, I'm not going to be confused until I understand what's going on. And
mhm,
so that's another thing that my parents taught me. We didn't understand so much. And so they taught their daughters to learn on our own because we were too insignificant to be mentored. Nobody cared about us. Nobody paid any attention to us. And
mhm,
so my parents taught us that we can all learn individually, we can do it on our own. And the way to do it is to observe, to watch, and listen.
mhm. And I love that the learning. You've had a lot of opportunity to learn like a massive amount about, I'm sure yourself, but also about the country and the roles you've had. So I'm curious. You guided, your office through some rough patches. So you were in office during, or you were in the cabinet during 9/11. You were in the cabinet during Katrina, and these were serious kind of experiences for the country. And I wonder what you learned in those experiences and maybe how you'd
Mm.
apply them to like where we are now. Like there's AI and automation that are poised to kind of reshape the labor markets, perhaps. I wonder what you've learned in your experience that might help us understand the moment we're in now.
Well, it seems so trite now to say that you have to kind of embrace the challenge. So in every single job that I've had, I never felt fully secure that I can do the job, but I wanted to try. So for example, like United Way. United Way was in really bad shape. They had a scandal with their previous president. He went to jail, frankly, because of embezzlement.
Mhm.
But I had been a volunteer in United Way, and I didn't want to look back and think that I didn't help out when I could have. And the
Mhm.
same thing with Peace Corps. I was not a Peace Corps volunteer. I
Mhm.
didn't understand the culture very well, but I thought Peace Corps performed an important contribution to the rest of the world
Mhm.
because of the people to people diplomacy.
Mhm.
And I wanted to understand and see, especially with my own international background, how I can help in that endeavor.
Mhm.
So each time I was motivated by the overall mission and the goal of the organization.
Mhm.
And leadership is something that gets honed with time. And so I encourage people, if you seek out leadership opportunities, you get better and better at it. So
Mhm.
it's good to start practicing early. And then if you make lots of mistakes, it's okay. You were young, you can come back. It's another thing time gets short.
Mhm.
And when you are older, when you come to the twilight of your life, there's just not that much room. It's just like investing. If you invest in your 20s, I mean, you can make mistakes or whatever, but time is on your side. And the same thing with leadership. I encourage young people just to seek out leadership opportunities. And one good way to do that is to be a volunteer for nonprofit organizations. Well, pick a cause that you really care about and then just volunteer. And I always joke, if you say the wrong things or you did the wrong thing, what are they going to do? Fire you? You're a volunteer. And then you can also see from these nonprofit organizations how people communicate, how other people lead,
Mhm.
and how interpersonal skills are displayed. It's really interesting.
Mhm. There's a famous quote. I think it goes something like, um, it's a Bismarck quote. Maybe you know this one. Fools learn from experience. I prefer to learn from the experience of others. Do you know this quote?
Yes, that's very Asian. It's very Chinese. So, my parents always say this to their Asian kids, to their kids. They always say, we learned, we've gotten these experiences. So we want to pass this on to our children and so that you can avoid our mistakes or something like that. But in America, there's also an expression, isn't there, that says, I've got to do it on my own. I've got to learn on my own.
Ah,
Yes, I totally agree with you. If you can learn from the experience of others, so much more efficient.
hmm. And so this is what I want to learn. I'm curious what you learned from your experiences that would benefit the students in the course. So you've had a number of experiences. I'm curious about, again, the experiences you had
Yeah,
in.
I may be wrong, but I think a lot of the Stanford Business School students are pretty well set, meaning they start off in a pretty good position in life. They may be, not as well off as some other classmates or whatever, but I mean, to be able to go to Stanford Business School, you already have some comfort in society,
Mhm.
some facility in moving around that society. So those are already big advantages. And so for me, this may seem silly, but I tell immigrants that America is a wonderful country. It has lots of opportunities. So first, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of failing. Don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid that you won't make it.
Mm.
So it seems so silly now because people look at me and they think I'm now part of the establishment, which is another joke. because I worked so hard to get to what I am. And then all of a sudden, it's like, I'm the establishment? When did that happen, you know? So I always remember what it was like to be here, to feel vulnerable, to feel anxious. I wasn't even a citizen until I was 19 years old. And I thought that I would never find my place in America, which is so funny now in retrospect. So number one, don't be afraid. You know, this is a very open country. Ask. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And don't be afraid to dream. And this country is good. You'll be okay.
And so I think of the roles you've had, I'm just really interested in your thoughts about um, serving, like just when you to serve in the cabinet is a very interesting thing because you're not an elected politician. So you, as far as I know, you've never been an elected politician, and it really is a service that you do for the, I assume for the country when someone asks, "Hey, are you willing to serve in these capacities?" And to say yes, to say like, I want to serve this country because it's given incredible opportunities to you because I assume you care deeply about that. I assume because you want other people to have those kind of opportunities. And I wonder,
And it's not hokey. I mean, you know, some people think that might be hokey,
mm,
but that's the wonderful thing about public service. I mean, you know, most of the people that I know, I mean, we make financial sacrifices and we
mm,
want to serve the country and the American people. It's
mhm.
very nice.
Yeah. And I
It's
wonder,
it's working for a larger goal than yourself.
so I wonder what you learn in those roles because there's also have to be challenges, right? And so our students are
Oh,
frequently,
it's challenges every single day. I mean, I wouldn't be in that position, you know, if if my day was not inundated with challenges because most of the easy problems get solved already.
yeah. And so
So
I'm curious,
it's the most intractable ones that come to you.
right. So I'm curious, what was the biggest challenge you faced?
Oh my gosh, there's so many.
Mhm.
Every single day is a challenge. But I will say, in summary, the greatest challenges are building consensus among different groups of people.
Hmm.
So the technical stuff, the policy stuff, it's not that hard. And it's not that new either. I mean, somebody somewhere, you know, has thought about this before. But the issue is, how do we build consensus? And do you go with 51% consensus,
Mm,
which in our electoral system is sufficient to determine the winner?
yeah.
But on the other hand, in some other organizations, to have real buy-in and to have real stake, you know, ownership stake by the stakeholders, we need more than 51%. So it's harder, maybe 70%, maybe 80%. So a lot of my job is, you know, for lack of a better word, it really is servant leadership. And that is how we are now talking about leadership,
Mhm.
that my job is to serve those that I lead,
Mhm.
to give them clarity, to demonstrate, you know, what the goals are and why. In some organizations, you have to start from ground zero, like United Way. We had to build a consensus on what the shared vision is. So
Mhm.
it was very much grassroots. But in a government, the secretary would have much more, a greater ability to kind of set the vision. And then, but you still have to, you know, win the hearts and the minds of people who follow.
Mhm.
That's the thing about leadership. It's not, it's hard. And
Mhm.
people don't follow just because you tell them to.
Yeah,
You have to persuade them, you have to win them over, and you have to consistently be worthy of their trust.
mhm. You know
So,
what?
for example, I never ask for loyalty in the beginning. I
Mm,
just want people to be competent. And when I come in as a political appointee, I recruit about 150, 160 political appointees. I don't
mm,
ask for loyalty. I
mm,
figure that if I am worthy, the loyalty will come.
mm,
My job, you know, is to make sure that the American people is served well with competent people and that I build the kind of team that will galvanize and, you know, move the organization forward. That's tough.
yeah. So you
So
know,
I,
like,
And
Loyalty is an
sorry, go
interesting
ahead.
question. I was going to say loyalty. That's interesting that you don't ask for loyalty when people immediately come in because,
You can't ask for it.
hmm.
People have to give it to you. It's not something forced, and you have to earn it, as well as respect every day.
And what do you think it takes to earn loyalty?
I think people people can feel what you're really like. So we use a term these days that's very common, it's authentic. And people can tell if you're faking it. And so your authenticity, your caring and concern for your team, it has to come from the heart. You can't fake it. Maybe you can for a little while, but most of the time, people can feel it. They can feel whether you really care and how much you're willing to sacrifice
Hmm.
for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also, that term sacrifice is really interesting too. How do you decide how much you're willing to sacrifice? For how have you made those decisions? This seems like a hard decision to make.
Indeed, it's very hard, and it depends on the situation. Um, and there'll be differences of opinion. And frankly, we are not asked to make that many hard choices and hard sacrifices. I mean, we think we are, but I mean, when I think about Sophie's choice, we're not in those kinds of choices. We're
Mhm.
very lucky in many, many ways.
Mhm.
And so to earn loyalty, you have to walk the talk and you have to demonstrate that you are true to the mission,
Mm.
that you are authentic, and that you're real, and
Mhm.
that you're vulnerable. When I was Peace Corps director, I learned a lot about leadership, which surprised me because I thought, this is all a bunch of volunteers, but one volunteer told me, it's a lesson I've never forgotten, and she says, we need to see your vulnerability.
Mm.
We need to feel that you're a real person, and then
Mhm.
we'll follow. And
Mm.
that was her point of view. I thought it was really interesting.
Mm. Yeah, I did a little bit of research on your career, which again is like, really astounding the things you've done and how many kind of service roles you've taken, and the things that
But I
you.
didn't start out that way.
No,
I
no,
just, you
yeah,
know,
I completely understand. But I'm also curious where, I think that it's interesting to think about where people started and also where they ended up because you learn a lot about the person both from both of those things, right? It's the journey. And I think your journey has been really interesting. And one of the things that I found most, I don't know, mm, I was struck by, um, I was struck by the fact that you like resigned from a post. That was striking to me. And I was,
yeah, that was shocking to me too, in this sense. That was a very quick decision.
mm. And it had to
So,
be really hard.
it,
And it had to take a lot of
yeah.
courage. And I just wondered how you thought, because given everything you've said thus far, it doesn't seem like something that would come easily for you, that it's not a decision that you would
No,
take.
because I'm a loyal person and
Mm,
I believe in public service. I joined, when I was Secretary of Transportation because I believe that the American people
mm,
needed to have a functioning government. There were
mm,
so many people coming in who were quite new,
yeah.
and I thought it was number one, if the president asked, you always say yes. That used to be the protocol. That was the tradition. And then secondly, I knew transportation very, very well. It was my third time back in the department, and I thought that I can lead it well.
Yeah.
So that was a nice feeling, actually, to be in that moment of your life. And I hope your students they will. They're a little too young now, but they'll come to that part of their life when, like, everything is in place and they will feel as if they are ready to lead and really lead. It's a
Mm.
nice feeling.
Yeah. And I just wonder when you look back on that particular moment. All right, how do you, because you said it was a fast decision, and I understand it was a quick decision. When you look back on that moment, what do you think about it? How do you feel about the decision you made?
Sadness,
Mm,
tremendous sadness, that our country had to go through that.
yeah.
And we're such a wonderful country. There's so many good aspects about it. And we didn't show ourselves very well that day.
Mm,
And I was actually concerned about my parents and my family. Because my father, the most important thing in life is you have to have a job. You understand. If you're from a financially insecure background, you got to have a job. And here I was, kind of walking away from it. So I called my youngest sister up and I said, "Hey, this is really unacceptable. It's been a long, long tenure, and but I really feel as if I need to go." And so I asked her to talk to my dad, and she did. And it was so reassuring. He came back through her, and he says, "You do what you think is right." That was all.
Huh. How come you didn't talk to your dad directly? How come you threw your sister? I'm curious.
Well, I didn't know what he would say. He would say, "Don't do it. You need the job. You need the money, or whatever. Or you shouldn't leave. It's a prestigious post, or So, not that he's superficial like that, but it's a matter of honor. If you have, we always thought, and perhaps this is also a reason for our success. We were always very grateful to those who hire us because they gave us an opportunity. And so we would do our best to be worthy of that. And so I didn't know what his reaction was. He is elderly, so I didn't want to shock him either.
You thought your sister would have a softer touch?
Yeah, because I wasn't there. She was there.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. I see. And I guess what would you, in those kind of roles, I mean, there's a decision that you make about, okay, I think there's what you were saying is historically, it's you just say yes. The president asks you to call to serve, you say yes. Um, and given now your experience, how would you suggest people think about those opportunities? Like, how do they judge them?
Our society is changing so much. Disruption has finally come to the federal government as well. And all of the protocols, traditions, they're changing. But it was something very nice that if the president asked, that you would do it. And I don't know I don't think I can do it. I mean, with what we have seen, I don't think I can make those cuts. I just couldn't. So not that I'm not a tough manager. I mean, I had, when I was president of the United Way, I made some very, very tough decisions. We were running out of, basically the organization raised about the network, the system, raised about $3.2 billion a year. And because of the misdeeds of the president, donations dropped precipitously. We had no money to meet the payroll. I had to cut back, the workforce by a third. I mean, that was hard. I had to run to the bank and beg them for a line of credit so I can continue to pay salaries. It was very bad. But
I can ask a question about the cuts.
Sure.
Let me ask a quick question about the cuts. I think that part of what's happening with the government, the disruption, is thinking that it's not efficient, which, I think you can make a reasonable argument that government is not efficient. Whether it should be or not is a different question.
I think that's an excellent point. I actually agree with you. I tell people the role of government is not to be efficient. The role of government is justice. If you have, a claim, if you have something that you felt was unfair, you have every right to appeal to the process that may give you the chance at justice. But what that means is the wheels of justice turn slowly, because just think, if you were an organization, you were just going to implement something, and then this person comes in and challenges it and adds a 3-year or 2-year process period through this litigation or, arbitration. That slows things down. But again, the government's role is justice.
But there's got to be a balance, right? Because there's so much red tape and nothing can get done, right? So, and this is where I think it's really what's happening now is interesting because there's a push to streamline. And I think you're saying like that's not how we should think about
I
government.
think directionally, a lot of Americans, most Americans, would not quibble with the fact that there is waste and abuse in the federal government and things can be done better. But the question is, who makes the cuts? And do you use a scalpel or do you use a machete? I would prefer a scalpel. And a scalpel is more difficult because it means that you have to know what you're cutting. It's not just a blanket across the board, kind of 30% cut or whatever. So it actually requires people who understand the programs, and that's just much more difficult.
Yeah, let me ask one more question about not cuts, but you were, as Secretary of Labor, you saw so much about how the country was organized and how it works. And going back, you see all these shifts coming now. What role does the government have in making a just change? If the labor market is going to shift, does government have a role there, and what role should it play, do you think?
Well, the government has a very big role in regulating safety,
Mm,
and health at the workplace, every single workplace in America. And the way to get it, how do we achieve that? There are differences from different quarters of the political spectrum. The Democrats probably will want to have a more heavy-handed, top-down approach, whereas the Republicans will likely want to have more cooperative coalitions or collaborations with the worker, the employer, the unions, and the management. So it's a matter of degree. And that's what we're really talking about. I think we all want safety at the workplace, but how do we do that without hampering, without dampening job creation, economic vitality? That's the same, that's the question. And the same thing also happens in transportation. I was very much in favor of, I had three goals. One is safety is number one. Number two, we've got to invest in infrastructure. And I did. I invested about $330 billion. And then the third one is I wanted to lay the foundation for building the transportation system of the future. And that is by engaging with emerging new technologies to ensure that public concerns about safety, security, and privacy were legitimately addressed without hampering innovation. I can address those issues, safety, privacy, security, really easily by just shutting down everything. But that's ridiculous. As Americans, one of our great traditions and exports is our innovative character, our innovation, our creativity. And that's something very tangible that characterizes the American experience.
When you just mentioned that you think that different parties would have different ways of approaching it, that everybody wants some version of the same outcomes, but the means of getting there might vary. Do you think things still break down cleanly like that these days? I'm just not sure how,
I'm not sure either.
and I don't know what to make of that. Like, what do you make of where we are in terms of the parties' way of approaching different
I
parties?
think both parties are much, much more too aligned to either side. And because of the primary system, you have members on the right and the left who are really hugging the right and the left. And the people in the middle just can't seem to get any traction. And yet, if we want to get anything done, we need to talk with one another at least. We need to communicate. We need to have shared values. What do you want? What do I want? How do we get together? You'll give up some of yours, I'll give up some of mine, and we'll go down this way. It's increasingly hard.
Yeah. And so if you're going to leave us the audience with one thing about leadership, what would you want to leave them with?
Humility. I listen all the time. And I think people sometimes think that that it's a weakness. And I think this is very much of still a Western kind of concept. So for Asians, our culture teaches us, and we're trained as little children, to not talk too much, but listen. So we're like 90% input, 10% output. Whereas we come to this mainstream American society where everybody talks, everybody talks. And it's 90% output and 10% input. So as a joke, I say to some of these, Asian exchange students who come to this country and they can't seem to find their way. And they said, oh, I said something wrong today. Oh, I did something wrong. And I say to them, don't worry. Nobody noticed. They probably weren't focused on you. They were focused on themselves. So don't worry. So this is it's a very free society. It's very open. It's got great tolerance for diversity of behaviors. I mean, what city in the world would call themselves weird, like Austin, and wear it proudly? So I think given the complexity of our country, the complexity of our world, it's more incumbent than ever for leaders to listen and to have humility. I used to think when I was growing up that being a strong leader meant that you had to dictate everything. And I thought I couldn't be a strong leader because I don't know anything. How can I be a strong leader? But I found through the example of Mary Kay, and it was through a Harvard Business School professor who said, he invited Mary Kay, this, and it might be a little too dated for your students. She was a very, very big makeup empire entrepreneur, and she sold makeup through a sales force of women at home. And so she was invited to Harvard Business School, and she brought her team. And she made some opening remarks. She sat down, the questions began, and the professor asked her, what about this? And then she smiled and nodded, and then she sat down and said, Bill, can you answer that, please? Now, a less secure leader would have thought, oh my goodness, I don't know the answer. I've got to turn to one of my staffers. She didn't mention it. She didn't mean it that way. She meant that her superpower was that she has this fantastic team. And whatever you want to know, somebody on her team knows. And because they work together as a team, they're able to see 360 degrees what reality is. All of us as leaders can only see a sliver of reality. And what I feared most as a leader was not knowing what I didn't know. And so building a team, empowering others to be able to help and carry out the mission of the organization, that was really important. And together, with different points of view, we have a more realistic view about reality and thus how to react, how to plan, and how to move forward.
Okay, well, I really appreciate taking the time to talk to me, Secretary Chow.
Not at all. Give my best to your students. I guess they'll see me a little bit. So hi there, everyone. Hope you have a good time in the class. Enjoy it.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.